Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the final days of Jesus. Much of what we're going to be discussing in this series has leaned heavily from a book by the same title, authored by Andreas J. Kostenberger and Justin Taylor. Now, this is a fantastic book, and it's worth your time to purchase and to read, as it's going to go into much greater detail about the topics that we're going to discuss in this series. It's important before we begin also to discuss our other source material for which we're going to be using for the rest of the week to explore the final days of Jesus, the Bible, specifically the four Gospels. These are found at the beginning of the New Testament. We see Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they contain eyewitness accounts and first-hand reports of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The Gospels are reliable sources of information for many factors. The first one being that Matthew and John, the authors of the first and fourth Gospels, were members of the 12 disciples of Jesus. Now, John was even part of Jesus' inner circle, and their records are trustworthy because they were on-site eyewitnesses of the accounts detailed in their writing. Now, Mark, the author of the second gospel, the church fathers tell us wrote his gospel in close association with the apostle Peter, which was also one of the 12 disciples, and he was a member of Jesus' inner circle, as well as a prominent spokesman of the 12. Last, we see Luke. Now, he himself was not an eyewitness. However, he sought to conduct a very careful investigation of these events. And in his writing, he even acknowledges his dependence on those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses. And you see this in the first chapter, verse 2 of his book. It is in these writings of these qualified authors where we get our source material for as we discuss the final days of Jesus. We hope you enjoy. Hello, and welcome to our study, The Final Days of Jesus. Today, we're going to talk about what happened on Monday, 4 days before Jesus' death on the cross and 6 days before his resurrection from the grave. It's Monday, March 30th, AD 33. Jesus and his disciples, they leave Bethany on that Monday morning. Jesus is hungry, and they spot a fig tree on their route to Jerusalem. Jesus gets to the fig tree and finds that even though it appears healthy on the outside, it has no fruit. And Jesus curses the fig tree. It's important to note here in this story that oftentimes in Old Testament, a fig tree Israel is referred to as a fig tree in the Old Testament. Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 13 says, When I would gather them, declares the Lord, there are no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree. Even the leaves are withered, and what I gave them has passed away from them. Hosea chapter 9, verse 10 says, Like grapes in the wilderness, I found Israel. Like the first fruit on a fig tree in its first season, I saw your fathers. And finally, in Joel chapter 1, verse 7, it says, It has laid waste my vine and splintered my fig tree. It has stripped off their bark and thrown it down. Their branches are made white. This is just a few of these things. And Jesus cursing the fig tree, it means something deeper. It symbolizes the judgment of God upon a nation that has an outward appearance of life, but actually no spiritual fruit. Now, this was Israel, of course. Now, don't miss the change of emotion here from Jesus' usual demeanor. What he's about to do, the mission he set himself on, it weighs heavy on his mind. And the people of Israel, they've fallen short. They've made a mockery of God's instruction, and they'll eventually brutally murder him in an attempt to safeguard this system that's failed and fallen short to accomplish its mission of preparing God's people for the coming Messiah, him. Jesus gets to Jerusalem after this, and it's still bustling about the events from the proclaimed king and the Messiah from the day before. All eyes are on Jesus. What's he going to do today? What way is he going to bring about the new kingdom? And Jesus, he wastes no time. And he heads straight to the temple. This was the last place he was the evening before, if you'll remember, and he knows exactly what he's going to find there. Mark chapter 11, verses 15 through 17, it records this interaction. It says, and they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple, and he began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers? Jesus had spent the night stewing on what he had found there the day before. Money changers and merchants selling sacrificial animals in the court of the Gentiles. These people were profiteering on something that had been intended to be sacred. They preyed upon the religious devotion of the Passover pilgrims, who must pay a temple tax of a Tyrian shekel and therefore change their money into that, and also present unblemished animals for sacrifice. Jesus was enraged and consumed with holy zeal. He overturns the tables and the chairs of the merchants, and he throws them out, and the customers alike. He refused entrance to the temple courts to anyone who was carrying any goods for sale. And then he takes this opportunity and he teaches the people what the purpose of the temple is. It's a house of prayer for all nations. He reminds them of what's written in Isaiah 56, verse 7. These I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. And Jesus says it's become a den of robbers, in which is a reference to Jeremiah 7:11 that says, and he's repulsed that the rich and the powerful are exploiting the poor under this guise of facilitating a worship of God. By these actions, Jesus directly challenges the Jewish leadership that are allowing this to take place. And more than that, they're likely benefiting from this. This is corruption. This is corruption of Israel's covenant that God has made with them for worship. Now the priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people, they desperately at this point begin looking for ways to destroy Jesus. Mark 11:18 says, and the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him because all the crowds were astonished at his teaching. Not only had Jesus directly challenged the Jewish authority, but the Romans needed really no excuse to eliminate anything that caused any kind of civil unrest. And rest assured, Jesus was causing considerable civil unrest. Mark tells us that in contrast to the leadership, the common people loved what they were seeing. Jesus is shaking things up, setting things right, just like the Messiah was supposed to do. By doing all of this, Jesus further seals his death sentence. Those in power would not put up with this blatant challenge to their authority. Jesus must die. Jesus teaches all day at the temple on Monday. When evening comes, he and his disciples, they return to Bethany. These are the events that took place on Monday, March 30th, AD 33. In the final days of Jesus. Find us on Facebook and YouTube tomorrow evening and discover what happens next in the final days of Jesus.